Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And this morning we are graced by the beautiful Marcia, who's going to be reading part 3 of our series, Undo the Coup, part 3 of Regicide by Gregory Douglas. And in this part 3, we're going to be reading some things that may be shocking and very challenging to people. But I think if you look through the footnotes and go through the process of digging, you'll find there's basis for it. So I think it's going to be a very interesting show, and I look forward to it. And we will start in about 30. And hello, everybody, once again. I am John O'Loughlin, and I'm very happy to be joined by my wife, Marcia Keith, this morning. Marcia, hi.
Hello. Happy fall equinox.
Indeed. Happy fall equinox, everybody. The vernal equinox is the spring one, and the autumnal equinox is the fall one. Yeah.
Indeed, yes.
Okay, so it definitely is a sign that things are changing in our climate.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it changes all the time, so.
Yes, these changes happen round the year, all
Right.
year long.
Okay, so we're getting ready for our next trip around the sun. And before we go, let's do some study. I want to study this book.
Yes.
Gregory Douglas, I'm almost certain, is a pseudonym. We don't know who he really is. I think you can dig around and maybe find out, but the content of the book is what interests us here at McDuff Lives. I've often said it doesn't really matter who says it. If it's true, it's true, you know?
There you go. Indeed.
All right. So we're on to our third part of our readings and comments, we call them, of the book Regicide by Gregory Douglas. And Marcia, you want to cue us up?
All right. Well, last week we read a chapter called The Alternative Theory that talked a little bit about some of the players and led us into this chapter titled The CIA. The Central Intelligence Agency grew out of the Wartime Office of Special Services, OSS, which was set up by William Donovan, a New York attorney, at the request of his friend, President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The president, a firm supporter of Joseph Stalin and a man of strong left-wing politics, mandated the OSS to render as much logistical support to the Soviet Union as possible.
Now, I have to stop right there. I mean, did it say, did anybody come into this show thinking, yeah, FDR, he was a big, firm supporter of Joe Stalin. Oh, yeah, we all know that.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's the kind of thing you read it and go, wait, did I read that wrong?
Yeah. And the effect can often be slamming the book closed and throwing it away because that's nonsense, right?
Right.
Well, we're not going to go that route. We're going to keep on. And he mandated the OSS to render as much logistical support to the Soviet Union as possible. Well, we certainly did make a whole lot of airplanes and tanks and trucks and Jeeps and send them over there, painted red stars on them in the airport in Alaska as they were getting ready to fly over. And, that's how the Soviets contributed to defeating the Nazis. Well, is that a bad thing? I don't know. Let's keep going.
Okay. The Roosevelt administration was packed with Soviet agents who dedicated their existence to the unqualified support of the communist state.
All right, I got to stop again. Where does he get that from? Okay. There is a footnote. Footnote 51 refers to a certain book, but I haven't read the book yet. But this is what we do. We're going to dig into that book and see what kind of a basis there is for that. But this is the claim of the McCarthy hearings. This is the claim of the right wing, and the China lobby, and that Roosevelt's administration was just peppered with commies. Well, that's what Gregory Douglas tells us. So let's keep
Indeed.
going.
Top presidential aide Harry Hopkins has been identified as a paid Soviet agent, as were Harry Dexter White, top advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr., Alger Hiss, senior official of the Department of State, David K. Niles, senior presidential advisor, and many others. The vice president, Henry Wallace, was in complete sympathy with the aims of Stalin.
There you go.
And
same thing.
Yeah. And while he was not a paid agent, he was an agent of influence and worked closely with the head of Soviet intelligence in Washington throughout and after the war. The OSS was filled with pro-Soviet agents who had been instructed by OSS Chief William Donovan to cooperate fully with their counterparts in the NKVD. With the death of Roosevelt in April of 1945 and the elevation of Vice President Harry Truman to the presidency, the eager, unstinting, and certainly questioned cooperation between Stalin's agents and the United States came to an end. Unlike his predecessor, Truman was not enraptured with fuzzy dreams of a People's Republic on the Potomac and almost immediately ordered the disbanding of the OSS. A number of its ultra-left-wing former agents were posted to the U.S. Department of State to await a dignified separation from government service, untainted by accusations of being active communists. There, the matter stood until 1947, when Truman mandated the formation of a new intelligence gathering agency. This was to be called the Central Intelligence Agency, and its sole purpose was to keep the president and his top officials current with global political intelligence.
Now, that's the first assertion that everybody would probably agree with because it says so in the history books.
Military intelligence was in the hands of respective services, but Truman wished to prevent another Pearl Harbor from being launched on the United States. One of the training films shown to CIA recruits has this anti-Pearl Harbor message as its main theme. If the purpose of the CIA was to prevent future surprise attacks on the United States, the terrorist attack on the United States on September 11, 2001, the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001 are overwhelming evidence that an astronomical amount of taxpayers' money was completely wasted.
Hang on a second. I have to say bravo. I mean, that is a zinger.
The vast sums voted by Congress and not subject to accounting under any circumstances might have been far better spent on constructive national programs that would have been subject to strict accountability.
Again, yeah.
Yeah. Starting out as a small agency under the direction of Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, the CIA was filled with former OSS personnel who certainly found their new role confusing. Instead of giving powerful assistance to the Soviet Union, their new agency rapidly grew into an anti-Soviet entity. When Alan Welsh Dulles joined the CIA in 1950, the agency was under the control of General Walter Bedell Smith, once Eisenhower's chief of staff and later U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. Dulles had been the OSS chief of station in neutral Switzerland, and his officially praised activities there were nothing more than an intelligence disaster of the highest magnitude.
Yep.
Dulles, who always entertained a very high opinion of himself, attempted to penetrate the defenses of the German Reich and actually believed that he had done so with brilliant success. In truth, German counterintelligence had easily penetrated his organization and filled complacent Dulles with an incredible amount of highly destructive disinformation. The Dulles analysis of conditions inside the Greater German Reich was read with hindsight. When read with hindsight, would be amusing in the extreme had not so many OSS agents been caught and executed because of the incompetence of the OSS chief of station, in many cases by the same man who later occupied a prominent position in the CIA. The Cold War was an engineered affair, and its chief architect was former German Army General Reinhard Gehlen, a former head of the Soviet military intelligence section of the Wehrmacht. Did I say that right? Okay.
I'm just advertising this book by Mary Ellen Reese, the General Reinhard Gehlen, the CIA Connection. You know, I've studied Galen for a long time because of his connection to Fort Hunt, Virginia, and being right across the river from where my family lived, and other interesting ideas that I've explored over the past, at least 10 years, probably 15. So to say Galen was the key is news to me. I always thought he was a puppet of Dulles and nothing more. So let's keep reading.
Okay. In 1948, at the request of his superiors, Galen concocted a lengthy pseudo-informational report stating that 135 Soviet armored divisions were poised to strike into Central Europe. This report was a complete fiction and was prepared solely to create a situation wherein the American military could legitimately increase its size, and American business, in a slump after the end of the boom years of World War II, would once again gear up for a highly profitable wartime economy. The so-called Galen Report was brilliantly successful once it had been leaked to key members of Congress and the president. This was the starting gun of a Cold War that ran on for over 40 years and lofted the CIA into a position of supreme power in the ruling circles of the American government. Because of what they convinced the American leadership was a mortal danger to the security of the United States, the CIA grew from an informational service to an enormous bloated agency with tens of thousands of employees and an annual budget running into the billions. They were, as they often pointed out to various occupants of the Oval Office in Congress, the shield and buckler of American freedom and, by extension, the freedom of the rest of the world, or at least that part of the world that had been the approval of the CIA and, by inference, the American government. Excuse me, I have a frog. Excuse me.
Uh-huh. Give me a warning and I'll hit your mute button the next time.
Okay, I will. I think frog is the
the frog is the buzzword?
Is the buzzword, right.
All right.
Okay. At the time of his devastating essay into creative writing, former General Galen was a paid employee of the CIA.
Right.
After Truman came Eisenhower, a man who strongly supported the CIA and cooperated in its empire building. From modest quarters in a disused Washington hospital, the CIA later expanded into an enormous office complex in Langley, Virginia. It now owns hundreds of proprietary businesses, including air and shipping lines, publishing and weapons companies, think tanks, import and export companies, and telecommunications networks. It also controls hundreds, if not thousands, of voluntary sources scattered throughout key elements of both the American and European private sectors. It was under Eisenhower that the CIA launched its clandestine warfare against the Marxist Cuban regime of Fidel Castro, warfare that the agency warmly believed would terminate a successful invasion of the Caribbean bastion of the world communist movement. If history can be said to be instructive, the CIA, like the Bourbons, obviously forgot nothing and learned nothing from their past errors. In 1956, a CIA instigated revolt broke out in Hungary, fueled by repeated CIA promises of immediate U.S. military assistance if the occupants of that nation rose up against their Soviet occupiers. The revolt was an initial success, but President Eisenhower quite sensibly refused to support it with American military aid, and it died in a bloodbath of Soviet military repression. Better, Eisenhower reasoned, a few thousand dead Hungarians than hundreds of thousands of dead Americans.
Can we stop for a second?
Yeah.
You see, he's going to be resonating. That's going to resonate, of course, with the Bay of Pigs later under Kennedy. But I think it's important to point out that this was the CIA making foreign policy on its own without the president knowing it.
Indeed.
And the person that is blamed for this is Frank Wisner, the famous Frank Wisner of the mighty Wurlitzer, the director of plans, DDP, and a man who died a horrible death not much later. It was on his conscience that the dead Hungarians were laid, but I think the book is correct in actually raising that up to Eisenhower, because Eisenhower allowed the CIA to create these schemes, and then a guy like Wisner will go out there and build up, a partisan army to fight and revolt and everything like that. But when it comes right down to it, America didn't really want to fight that war, and Eisenhower knew it. So he squashed it, and thereby Hungary suffered terribly and still has the shadow of that horrible event cast over it.
As he says, a bloodbath of Soviet military repression.
Yeah.
The identical scenario was to be repeated in the so-called Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961. Kennedy, Eisenhower's successor, had only been partially briefed by the CIA and had given his conditional approval to the projected invasion by Cuban nationals of Castro's fortress. In order to prevent another Hungarian fiasco, the CIA had thoughtfully dispatched a boatload of Cuban rebels disguised as members of the regular Cuban armed forces to launch an attack on the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. In furtherance of strongly desired military attacks on Cuba, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, JCS, prepared Operation Northwoods. This plan was to deliberately provoke a war with Cuba by executing a series of assaults on the United States by American Special Forces.
Can I just throw a name in there that I want everybody to remember? Ed Lansdale. This is Ed Lansdale conducting these, and Leimnitzer, of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's the author of the Operation Northwoods report. But who prepared it? Who put it together? There's Ed Lansdale to blame, and I want his name to be known in infamy.
Boats full of Cuban refugees were to be sunk on the high seas. Aircraft were to be hijacked, bombs detonated in American cities, an American military ship was to be blown up, and passenger aircraft destroyed in the air. Passenger aircraft, what does that remind us of? All of these terrorist acts against American cities and its citizens, shockingly redolent of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack on New York and Washington, were to be planned and executed by the American military under orders of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and conducted by American military and civilian personnel. The attacks on shipping in Guantanamo Bay were part and parcel of Operation Northwoods. And here the author is including a section of the Russian intelligence study that was referred to in an earlier episode of Macduff Lives.
Yeah, look at parts 1 and 2 of our Regicide series, which are the two previous, and you'll get the background on these sources, such as the Russian intelligence study.
At that time, the FBI was involved, at the request of the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, in watching the clandestine activities of the CIA and its Alpha and Omega special commando groups, some of who were in training in the New Orleans area.
All right, hang on a second. let's just put a footnote that McDuff, my dad, was in the FBI up until February of 1962. So during this period, he could have been involved in operation that was run by the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. He could have been. I haven't got any proof, but it's a speculation that deserves some serious investigation.
The American president was greatly concerned that continued and fully unauthorized paramilitary action against Cuba might upset the balance he had achieved in seeking peace with the Soviet Union. It is known from informants inside the CIA and also from Cuban double agents that the CIA was, in conjunction with the highest American military leadership, to force an American invasion of Cuba. These joint plans, which consisted of acts of extreme provocation by American units against American property and citizens, were unknown to Kennedy. Unknown to Kennedy. When the American president discovered that Cuban insurgents under the control of the CIA and with the support of the highest military leadership were embarked on a course of launching military action against American naval bases under the cover of being Cuban regular troops, he at once ordered a halt. And this is from the Russian intelligence study. The JCS anticipated that the U.S. forces at the base would naturally return fire and call for military assistance. This assistance, they reasoned, would guarantee full and official American military support of their venture. They did not anticipate that some unhelpful individual in their ranks would have informed Kennedy of their scheme to involve the United States in a massive invasion of Cuba, nor that the new president's immediate response to the Guantanamo diversion was not only to recall the projected attackers, but also to refuse to support the CIA-organized landings at the Bay of Pigs. Instead of the Cuban people rising in joyous revolt against Castro, as the CIA pundits fondly believed, the evil Marxist dictator easily crushed the invasion and captured or killed all of the CIA's troops.
And again, Ed Lansdale, I just have to put the name out there.
There was great and understandable unhappiness in the camps of Cuban rebels, and the CIA, with commendable forthrightness, shifted the blame for the disaster onto the new president. This was one of the major building blocks of the conspiracy to remove John Kennedy from office. When the president learned the full scope of the CIA's duplicity, he fired the beloved head of the CIA, Alan Welsh Dulles, as well as General Charles P. Cabell, and Richard Bissell Jr., the CIA's Director of Clandestine Services. He also told Senator Mike Mansfield that he planned to break up the CIA and scatter it to the winds.
Did you ever reflect on the fact that the two major vacuum cleaner companies are named Hoover and Bissell?
Something to think about. The leadership of the CIA, especially James Jesus Angleton, felt that Kennedy had sufficient knowledge of the Cuban putsch, and that his sacking of their top officials and threats to disband them were merely designed to distance him from the debacle. This was another of the building blocks of the CIA's growing fear of the Kennedy presidency. After the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the CIA continued their commando raids against Cuba and its ruler. It was during this time that Angleton approached the Chicago Mafia with an eye to assassinating Fidel Castro.
All right, so it was Angleton, and I agree with that based on my reading. But again, I'm not the expert. I'm reading all these books so that we can obtain some expertise here and hopefully put out some good roadmaps for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, putting together the puzzle pieces. Then this quote from the DIA analysis of that Soviet report. The attempt of the CIA and the JCS to remove Castro by assassination are also part of the official record. And that always blows my mind, the official record. These assassination plots called Rifle show the connections between the CIA and the Chicago branch of the mafia. And that from the DIA analysis. The mob was certainly eager to regain control of its lucrative Cuban casinos, and various conversations took place concerning the physical removal of the Cuban leader. As has always been the case, the CIA demands plausible deniability on its part should one of their often bizarre plots suddenly come to the public attention. In the case of Castro, the plans discussed bordered on the lunatic. He would be blown up by a booby trap cunningly disguised as a rare seashell. His wetsuit would be poisoned. And even more ludicrous, a drug would be put into his shoes to cause his trademark beard to fall out. As the usual method of mafia removal was to shoot their target and be done with it, one wonders if Sam Giancana was entertaining himself with the slapstick efforts of the shield of democracy. Indeed.
Well, I think what he's not seeing is the connection to Sidney Gottlieb at the CIA, who's coming up with various psychological ways as well as poison.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just Giancana, it's also the poisoner in chief, as Stephen Kinzer calls him in his book.
Exactly. It's making Toto gag. The Soviet KGB learned of these plots, and Nikita Khrushchev became convinced that the United States planned to kill off one of his more prominent satellite leaders and invade his bastion of Western Hemisphere Marxism. In order to frustrate the United States in its ambitions and to protect his client, Khrushchev began to clandestinely move Soviet troops and missiles into the tropical paradise with an eye to balancing the scales. The United States, after all, had placed its Jupiter missiles in Turkey right on the Soviet border, and a quid pro quo appeared to be entirely in order.
Hang on a second. I don't buy that.
Okay.
I just have to say, Khrushchev placing, nuclear-tipped missiles on Cuba as a bargaining chip doesn't make sense. I mean, that is an existential threat, as people use that word now.
Yes.
And no, he knew we would have to respond. And, again, there are powers in this world that want a world war. So I'm a little skeptical of that reasoning.
Next, we have another quote from the Russian intelligence study. American, and most especially the CIA, attempts to destabilize a communist state, i.e. Cuba, could not be permitted by the Soviet leadership. Castro was a most valuable client in that he provided an excellent base of intelligence and political operations in the American hemisphere. As the CIA had been setting up its own ring of hostile states surrounding the Soviet Union, Cuba was viewed officially as a completely legitimate area of political expansion. Threats of invasion and physical actions against Cuba were viewed by the chairman as threats against the Soviet Union itself. That from the Russian intelligence study, and then from the DIA analysis. Soviet attempts to gain a strategic foothold in close proximity to the United States, and certainly well within missile range, was intolerable and had to be countered with equal force. At that time, the threat of major war was not only imminent, but anticipated. In retrospect, all-out nuclear warfare between the United States and the Soviet Union was only barely averted, and only at the last minute. And again, that was from the DIA analysis.
I really want that analysis. I want that original from 1978. If I had that, then I would feel very, very comfortable in settling my opinions about things. The Defense Intelligence Agency was run by General Joseph F. Carroll, a very, very staunch right-wing Catholic. And the idea of his being influenced by the church is one of the many compelling ideas I'd like to explore. So just a footnote.
Indeed. The U.S. discovered the Soviet actions, and the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted in October of 1962. Kennedy ordered overflights of Cuba to verify Soviet missile positions, then blockaded the country and threatened to prevent further Soviet shipments of weaponry by force if necessary. In the end, common sense on both sides prevailed, and the crisis ended peacefully. The Soviets agreed to withdraw their weapons, and the United States agreed to withdraw its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Kennedy also agreed to halt armed commando raids against Cuba and abandon any attempt to physically invade Khrushchev's ally. As this meant the cessation of the CIA attacks, the agency was infuriated. The training and supply of these militant units was an excellent source of money that, again, did not need to be accounted for. The termination of funding for the Cuban adventurers meant a serious diminution of the flow of money that the CIA found so comforting and useful. As a result of his rapprochement with his opposite number in the Kremlin, Kennedy ordered all CIA incursions and commando activities against Cuba to cease. The CIA paid no attention to the president's orders, and Kennedy then ordered the FBI to raid the CIA camps, seize weapons and paperwork, and arrest anyone found. This from the Russian intelligence study. The American president, unsure of the depth of his influence with the leadership of the American military and the CIA, ordered the FBI to investigate these matters and ordered the director, Hoover, to report directly to him on his findings. That was from the Russian intelligence study. These actions merely confirmed to certain high elements in the CIA that Kennedy had to be silenced. He had, in fact, become a stone in their shoe. What really convinced the CIA to remove their president had its roots in the Bay of Pigs episode and was viewed by Angleton, Crowley, and others as an imperative that both Kennedy and his brother Robert be removed from the levers of power as expeditiously as possible. Injured feelings and lost revenue aside, the leadership of the CIA did indeed have what could well be considered as a thoroughly legitimate reason for their actions. One of the top Soviet intelligence agents in Washington at the time of the Bay of Pigs was Georgy Bolshakov. Ostensibly a reporter from the Soviet TASS news agency, Bolshakov was approached by Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Edwin Guthman, shortly after the disastrous Bay of Pigs. The president and his brother were, above all, political pragmatists. They had learned this from their practical and ruthless father. From April of 1961 onward, the President of the United States, through his brother, the Attorney General, was in direct contact with Soviet Premier Khrushchev, effectively bypassing not only his Department of State, but the CIA as well. The Soviets bypassed their own ambassador in this, and the two leaders kept in constant contact. The purpose of this unofficial contact was to ensure that neither party suffered from the actions of the other and that both men could be of mutual assistance to each other's political careers without the danger of serious confrontations and possible conflict. In August of 1961, in order to prevent the flight of valuable East German professionals to the West, the German capital was bisected by the Berlin Wall. In the West, this act was viewed as a terrible provocation, but serious confrontation between the two powers was quickly averted when Kennedy granted, through the offices of Bolshakov, that he would not make any serious move to contest the Soviet actions. The Kennedy-Khrushchev contacts continued on a regular basis at the very least until January of 1963. In August of 1962, James Jesus Angleton, chief of counterintelligence for the CIA, was informed from a very reliable Soviet source that highly secret top-level American intelligence information was coming into the hands of the Soviet leadership on a regular basis. Angleton was given several specific items of extraordinarily sensitive and accurate nature then circulating in Moscow. A second report from the same source via Sweden in early September of 1962 thoroughly frightened Angleton and convinced him that there was a very high-level mole somewhere in the upper levels of his own CIA. Always inclined to a paranoid view of his profession, the frantic Angleton started an intense search for the disastrous leak. The CIA was so large and those possessing knowledge of the secret material so diverse in number that he found himself frustrated in his efforts to pinpoint the mole in his agency. Finally, Robert Crowley suggested a possible means by which the leak could be identified. He knew that the leaked information was all contained in the regular CIA reports that were circulated in official Washington. These reports were highly classified and only a handful of top-level personnel were privy to their contents. Crowley suggested that each report be prepared with a different additive. The basic reports, he said, should all be the same, but each one should contain an entirely different subject. This inclusion should be of such a nature as to draw strong attention to itself, but not distract from the thrust of the intelligence evaluations. Frog. Thank you. Sorry. Oops. Okay, there we go. All right, sorry. Desperate and frantic at his lack of success in tracking the leak and the leakers, Angleton followed Crowley's shrewd and very practical advice. Subsequent top-level CIA briefing reports did indeed have the telltale additives included in them. In December of 1962, a report from the Soviet source contained an almost verbatim copy of a CIA report with an identifying marker included. Angleton and his inner circle of counterintelligence staff were horrified to discover that the link was coming from the CIA reports given to the president himself. Excuse me. It was a well-known Washington secret that the president entertained a steady stream of Washington prostitutes, party girls, and other women of easy virtue in the White House whenever his wife was absent. There were nude swimming parties in the White House pool with Kennedy and some of his aides cavorting with his female visitors. Drugs were used, including marijuana, cocaine, and finally, LSD. Kennedy, who liked three-way sex, had professional pictures taken of himself and his ladies. Now, why would he do that?
I know. That part is just, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this business about a well-known Washington secret that the president entertained a steady stream sounds just like gossip to me.
Yes.
And, how can this author somehow perceive that Kennedy liked three-way sex other than that he's trying to disparage Kennedy's character?
A number of these photographs developed and printed and often framed as presidential gifts, right?
Well, maybe they were like pictures of them with clothes on, like it's just like
Let's hope so.
The official visit,
Right. I'm president of the United States and I'm going to give away nude photos framed to everybody who comes along. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, by a well-known Washington photography gallery, came into the hands of Robert Crowley at one point and ended up in his papers. And what is this? This is from the Russian intelligence study. It is an absolute fact that both the American president, Kennedy, and his brother, the American Attorney General, were especially active in a sexual sense. A number of sexually explicit pictures of the president engaging in sexual acts are in the official files, as are several pictures of the Attorney General taken while on a visit to Moscow in 1961. The president was aware that a number of these pictures were in Soviet hands and acted accordingly. In addition to a regular parade of whores into the White House, it was also reliably reported from several sources that the president was a heavy user of various kinds of illegal narcotics. It is also known from medical reports that the president suffered from a chronic venereal disease for which he was receiving medical treatment.
Okay, that answers a question that you had a little earlier as to what is it's in official sources. The official sources are the Russian files that he's talking about, or the Soviet files.
Angleton found it an extremely difficult prospect to investigate the White House personnel to determine the source of the serious leaks of the CIA's top briefing papers. Kennedy's personal staff was noted for its loyalty to the president, and Angleton said repeatedly that any hint of his very active suspicions of peculation in the White House might well backfire in a fatal way if they became known. Finally, in late December of 1962, a personal friend commented in passing that Bobby Kennedy had developed a very close relationship with a top Soviet agent in Washington. And at this point, the entire secret backstairs diplomacy became a matter of growing knowledge in the CIA. Angleton had the technical section of the CIA tap the telephones of the Attorney General, both those in his private office and the ones in his home in Virginia. It was only a matter of time before the CIA frog again. It was only it didn't go away. So sorry. Please excuse me.
Would you like me to pick up reading here?
Yeah, maybe you should.
All right.
It was only a matter of time. Bottom right corner.
It was only a matter of time before the CIA technicians successfully intercepted a call between Bobby Kennedy and Bolshakov in February of 1963. During the course of this taped conversation, it became very clear that the American president and the Soviet premier had been in direct contact for some time through the medium of Bobby Kennedy and a senior KGB agent. A comment from the Russian about material that could only have come from the president's CIA briefing papers convinced Angleton that the Kennedys were engaging in treasonable activities and had severely compromised a number of important CIA agents and operations throughout the world. And now we read again from the Russian intelligence study. In order to better cooperate with the Soviet Union, President Kennedy used to regularly keep in close private communications with the chairman. These contacts were kept private to prevent negative influences from the State Department and most certainly from the CIA. The president said several times that he did not trust this agency, who was bent on stirring up a war between the two nations. Through this personal contact, many matters that might have escalated due to the interference of others were peacefully settled. The president's highly unorthodox form of personal diplomacy vis-a-vis the Soviets created far more problems than it ever solved. When it came to light, both the DOS, that's the Department of State, and the CIA were extremely concerned that sensitive intelligence matters might have been inadvertently passed to the Soviets. That's from the DIA analysis. I'm sorry, I just keep thinking about General Carroll because I know my dad knew General Carroll, and I'm thinking about, did General Carroll sign off on the assassination?
Interesting idea.
Okay, back to the text with Gregory Douglas.
I'm good. I can pick up again.
Okay.
The fact that the president's brother, with his permission, was passing what the CIA considered highly secret material to their chief enemy had a terrible effect. Angleton, who knew the president and his family socially, was devastated. In a series of private meetings held between himself and several of his trusted associates, including Robert Crowley, who took notes, Angleton made a strong case against Kennedy. He claimed that Kennedy himself had approved the Bay of Pigs action, but dropped it at the last minute out of moral weakness. Angleton believed that Kennedy then deliberately attacked the leadership of the CIA, firing Allen Dulles, among others, and basically accusing the agency of bad faith and duplicity.
Can I stop you once?
Huh?
Moral weakness. What about the law? What about the Constitution? This is Angleton defining what is right and wrong, saying, I understand morality, and morality is what's more important than any of these documents like this silly little Constitution that's such a pain in the ass, right? That's what's going on here, is Angleton is taking onto himself the power of government.
Right.
Makes me a little angry.
Where was I?
Duplicity.
Angleton was positive that Kennedy had fully approved all of the CIA's actions in the Bay of Pigs mission, but had blamed others to save his own reputation. The failure of the mission was, Angleton said, solely the result of Kennedy's cowardice.
Huh.
His negotiations behind the back of responsible American government agencies with the head of the Soviet Union smacked of treason and certainly undermined all of the intense work the CIA was doing to thwart Soviet imperialism, both in Europe and Latin America. But far and away the gravest charge leveled against the president was his behavior in not striking militarily at the armed Soviet troops and their deadly missiles stationed only a few miles away from American soil. Not only had Kennedy allowed the Soviets to get away with their aggression, he further removed American missiles from Turkey and materially weakened the American military position in Europe. As far as the passing of the highly sensitive material to the Soviets was concerned, a furious Angleton claimed that this was high treason and the president should be removed from his high office. Kennedy was far too popular to institute impeachment proceedings against him in the Congress. Leaking the information about the CIA reports being given to Khrushchev to the CIA's many friendly press sources was also ruled out. If made public, this information would not only damage Kennedy, it would also damage the reputation of the CIA and unduly alarm its many highly placed international sources. Finally, after a series of heated meetings over the period of a month, the subject of physical removal was not only broached but also developed. After all, the CIA had been responsible for a significant number of high-level political assassinations in the past, albeit in other countries, and they had not only the means, but also the conditioning to assist their planning.
Conditioning. What does conditioning mean in this context? It means that they have been psychologically manipulated to be willing to do it.
Yeah, their mindset is how I would interpret that, yeah. In late February, the general outline of the plot was well set. Initial plans to blow up the presidential plane were scrapped. Secret Service and U.S. Air Force security were far too comprehensive to permit the clandestine placing of an explosive on Air Force One. A second plan was to approach one of the president's physicians, Dr. Max Jacobson, with a view to convince the doctor who supplied and injected the president with amphetamines to put certain fatal additives in Kennedy's drugs. The CIA had a small but effective laboratory that specialized in rare poisons. I'm going to repeat that sentence. The CIA had a small but effective laboratory that specialized in rare poisons. This plan was rejected because it was felt Jacobson was unstable and associated with too many questionable individuals. Using his services would have necessitated removing the doctor as well, and Angleton was strongly against involving more untrustworthy people than necessary in his plot. It was also suggested that since the president was known to sail in Massachusetts coastal waters, an assassin could either shoot him at a distance or attach an explosive charge to the bottom of his boat. This was generally rejected by everyone but Angleton because the president's wife and children might well be on board, and this was found to be unacceptable. It was finally decided to shoot the president when he was in open rather than in a building that could easily be sealed off and immediately searched. The political trip to Dallas had not yet been planned, and there was a great deal of practical work to do before any assassination could be successfully attempted. If the president was shot in public, the assassin stood a high risk of being captured. If this happened, there was an even worse risk that he could somehow be traced to the CIA. The CIA therefore realized that it had to get the support of the entire governmental apparatus to be able to implement such a radical solution to what it considered to be the most serious threat to U.S. security in decades. End of chapter.
Well, that sets the table. I just invite people to think through the ideas that you see here. And also remember, we've done a number of shows on Angleton in the past, and he is, in my opinion, also an agent of the Mossad, of the Israeli intelligence service, that he was flipped a long time before. And while this book does not seem to focus on the Israeli angle, it is Angleton who is in the position to execute Israeli policy as a traitor to the United States. And so these obfuscations and these excuses like, oh, there's not enough time, or we couldn't convince the American people because they love him, because, you know, he's Mr. Camelot. So, you know, we can't try to impeach him because he'll never work. Those are all just excuses for somebody that really wants to shoot him.
Right. Right.
And that has nothing to do with the Constitution or the government of the United States. And it just shows me, and I think it's very compelling, that the CIA itself was never intended to follow the Constitution. It was always intended to be a super governmental agency that operates over country lines without any supervision whatsoever when it comes to its special operations. And that is the tragedy of my father's career, where President Kennedy created the agency called SACSA to take all of the special ops away from the CIA. And that leads us directly into the McDuff story itself. Fascinating stuff. It's my goal to understand as much of this as I can within my lifetime and to share it with you here at McDuff Lives. And get a copy of my book if you haven't. It's only $10 on Amazon. It's called McDuff Lives. And it'll fill you in on who Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr. Was, to the best of my knowledge. Another edition might come out sometime, so I'm working on it. I've got some ideas and doing my research as we speak. So, folks, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting our work here at McDuff Lives.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all our Patreons. And we will see you tomorrow here at McDuff Lives with our good friend, Hervoye Morich of Geopolitics and Empire. So tune in tomorrow, Eastern Time, 11 a.m. as usual. And I hope you can join us then. Marcia, Keith, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this important work. And thank you, all of you who participate as well.
Okay, that's our show for today. Thank you, guys.